The Bilderbergers are searching for the age of post-nationalism, when we won't have countries but rather regions of Earth surrounded by universal values. That is to say, a global economy, one world government selected rather than elected, and a universal religion. Pretty scary stuff, but what if it's true? It might be. We're joined in the studio right now by the author of The True Story of the Bilderberg Group, Daniel Estulin. Welcome, Daniel.
Thanks for having me.
Daniel, how did you get involved in this subject?
Well, it's kind of a cloak and dagger story, really. In 1992, a friend of my grandfather's was a colonel in the KGB. Actually, he was a double agent. He was in trouble. He needed help. My grandfather's help. He tried to get to him through me. And he started talking to me about the secret society called the Bilderberg something or other. And I had no idea what he was talking about. And, of course, I was way over my head. And initially, I got into this thing because I thought it was just a great way to pick up girls with these James Bond 007-like stories. Until I realized when I got, into it a little bit that actually a lot of the stuff was true. And the more I got into it, the more I realized that there was a parallel universe which people generally are not aware of. And that's when the Bilderbergers fully consumed me. And ever since 1995, I've been investigating them more or less full time.
We know that powerful people get together and make economic plans, but you suggest that it's more than that.
Well, first of all, Lenny, I'd like to tell you what it is not. It is not a Jewish Masonic conspiracy. It is not an Illuminati conspiracy, whatever the heck that is. And it's also not a monolith, meaning that no group of powerful people, I don't care how powerful they are, get together to sit in a room, dark room, holding hands, staring at a crystal ball, planning the world's domination. It doesn't really work that way. What they are, actually, it's what I call the aristocracy of purpose. Bilderberg's NATO alliance, Europe, United States, and Canada, coming together, meeting, and finding the best ways to manage the planet, which is always about two things, the natural resources and money. But again, money ultimately becomes worthless if there is no natural resources to support it.
What kind of people make it up? Bankers, industrialists?
Presidents of every NATO alliance is there. The leading bankers of every European nation is there. President of the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Federal Reserve, all European commissioners are involved. Top 100 CEOs of all the leading corporations, Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, Boeing, etc. And with them at the table sit the leading royalty representatives as well as the leading media outlets such as the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Fox, Le Monde, etc., which is, again, one of the reasons we might not have heard of the Bilderbergers is that, again, they control all the levers of power, not on the conspiratorial way, but on the very practical systemic conspiracy where, again, leading roles are controlled by the principal players involved in a group.
In the book, you mentioned that U.S. presidents have been essentially selected or must be approved by the Bilderberg Group.
What you just said sounds like, a conspiracy that nobody will actually believe. The way it actually works, if you look historically, and again, I talk about it in the book, over the last 60 years or so, every president and every presidential candidate for the both parties, as well as the independent candidates, have all belonged to the Bilderberg Group, to the Trilateral Commission, or to the Council on Foreign Relations, which are three groups, interlocked amongst each other, amongst themselves. And again, it's just a very powerful forum where people who can actually help the interests of the Bilderbergers come, attend, and if they hold some kind of promise in the future, they get invited back for a second and third look, and that's when they become full-fledged members. But again, it's documented historical evidence that every president and or presidential contender from the opposition party has been a member of the Bilderbergers. And the people who are not, such as, the current Bush too, he has surrounded himself, with the leading representatives of the Bilderbergers, such as Cheney, Rumsfeld, Rice, Pearl, etc., etc. So again, nobody gets to any position of power unless they play along.
This is a carrot and stick relationship. The Bilderberg Group accepts you for head of state, whether it's the United States or one of the European countries. They approve of you. The stick is you must basically toe their party line. And what is the overall party line?
Well, if you don't toe the party line, what will happen to you? Again, these people are very powerful. They don't need to threaten anybody. There's no death threats involved. With a smile, that's enough. Margaret Thatcher, when she was selected by the Bilderbergers long time ago, when the time came for her to support the European integration, she basically came out in public and said that she will not allow a group of unelected bankers to rule the country. And we know what happened to her. She was replaced by a virtual coup d'etat within their own party by John Major, who was subsequently replaced when his time ran out by another lackey of the Bilderbergers by the name of Tony Blair. So again, selection process works wonders, and these people know they toe the line. And towing the line means, again, one world government, not one world order, because it's a very old concept, goes back too far in history. One constitution, one currency, one flag. And again, we're seeing it. Europe is that. North America is about to become that. Asian Union is the third step, and that's a penultimate step to joining or merging these three, or fusing them into the virtual world government.
Daniel, let's talk a minute about one world currency and going into the North American Union. We've heard about the North American Union. We've heard about the coming of the Amero. Vicente Fox, Mexico's former president, let the cat out of the bag on Larry King's show about a week ago. How serious do you think this is? And tell us where you think it's going to go.
Well, I think it's very, very real. I think it's just incredible that Americans and Canadians are just not getting it. Now, let me give you an example before I get into this. 5 days ago, coming into Canada on a European flight, I live in Europe, I was stopped in Toronto airport by American private security contractors working for DynCorp, who basically were deciding whether I can enter my country on a Canadian passport or not. Now, if that doesn't bring it home, I don't think anything will. You know, I talk about it in my book. In 1996, when we discovered Bilderberg plans to dismantle Canada and join the English-speaking Canada and the United States into a greater North America, we exposed their plans, and they had to postpone their merger to 2000 and then 2007. We're in the year 2007. This, the North American Union is a reality, and the only journalist in North America that's talking about it, a guy by the name of Lou Dobbs. And according to, again, to the CNN, the Amero, which is, the future North American currency, that's going to become a reality within the next year. I'm convinced it's going to be a reality because, again, the same process of integration we've had in Europe. Now, we don't have countries. We have one country called Europe. We have one currency called the Euro, one constitution, which takes precedence over national constitutions. This is exactly what they're going to do here. And again, this is a plan which goes back to the early 1950s when they created, European Union, the first basic model. And they're going to do the same with North America. They're doing the same with Asia. And as Kenneth Clark, the British representative of the Bilderberger, said, we need this for bureaucratic purposes. It's just much easier to work with one constitution, one currency, and one country than have all these independent nation states trying to be independent.
You mentioned in the book that you believe that the basic ruling body would be the United Nations. Now, at the same time, we hear that key players in the Bilderberg Group are part of the neocons. The neocons of the Bush administration have taken to task the job of dismembering, discrediting, and making irrelevant the UN when they don't suit their needs.
The neocons and the Bush administration doesn't have a say in the world integration. If you want to understand who runs the world, the trick is to find the man behind the curtain. It's like in The Wizard of Oz. Once you find the wizard, you know how the whole thing is run. So the neocons don't really have a say in the matter. And it is true that Americans are, they have quite an aversion to the United Nations. But also, the Europeans, on the other hand, because it is a NATO alliance and it is a world conglomerate, they put a lot of stock in United Nations still to this day. So if you want any kind of an operation run on the world stage, according to Europe, it must be done through the offices of the United Nations, which is why, again, they're using the United Nations as the battering ram. And you could see it, it's being done in Birmania, it's being done in Burma, it's being done in Africa, it's like anywhere there is conflict and strife, the United Nations is there. And of course, the same people run the United Nations who are for the world government. It's just a way of controlling the entire thing.
Let's talk a moment about the events of 9/11 and the war on terror. How is this being viewed by the Bilderbergers, and is it possible they had any hand in, let's just say, the growing war on terror?
Well, I always say that in order to understand 9/11, one must know a lot about the French Revolution and the Jacobean terror. It's the same thing. Just for the record, the war is not being waged against Osama bin Laden. Al-Qaeda is not the enemy, neither is the traveling circus known as the mullahs of Iran. The enemy are us. We, the people, are the enemy. And these people aren't going to stop until they destroy us. until they annihilate us, until they nullify us and take whatever little rights we still have left. So 9/11 was, let's just say, that decision to cross that final barrier of no return and to wage that war against civilization at the cost of all of us. And again, I am personally convinced that, again, I said there are two things in this whole equation. One is money, and the other one is energy. One of the key issues for the Bilderbergers over the last 25 years in their meetings has been energy, which has always been the number one issue, the energy control. And money ultimately becomes worthless unless you have energy such as oil, to back it all up. So 9/11 is, again, it's the war against us, the war against terrorists, the war for the remaining energy supplies such as oil, natural gas, etc., etc. And, I think people pretty much do understand that, the Bush administration was behind the whole thing, just as people who understand French Revolution understand that the Jacobean terror was a way of eliminating the true revolution, which would have brought, the second nation state back to Europe. The first one was, of course, the United States.
Henry Kissinger's name has come up again and again. Christopher Hitchens has written about the trials of Henry Kissinger, how he's been such a power player for so many years. Does he really represent the multinational interests that really control the power of the world?
He is very deeply involved, but again, he's not a significant player, and as far as we know who he is. And when it comes to, ultimate power, the people who control it, these are the men behind the curtain. You can't see their faces. You don't know who they are until I start exposing them in this book. So, yes, he's a significant player, but he's just, lackey in the end. He's just a guy you could see who does all the dirty jobs for you. But again, he doesn't have a lot of power because the people who do have a lot of power are invisible.
You attended and got to the inside of the Bilderberg Group meeting in Canada. Tell us a little about that, and what was that meeting going to be?
Well, I've been to a couple of them. I've been to the one in 1996 when they discussed the hostilities in Kosovo, which of course we reported in 1996, 3 years before the war in Kosovo took place. I mean, it's just tremendous when you actually think about it. In 1996, they also discussed the destruction of Canada. And last year, they discussed one of the key areas where, a tremendous concern, aside from the Iran, Iraq, all that stuff. They were extremely concerned about, the impending collapse of the housing market in the United States. And we reported, again, it's on record, you could see it, a year and a half before we see what we're witnessing right now with, the wholesale destruction of the housing market. We reported a year and a half ago that people, members were standing up and saying what will happen when people with a $500,000 mortgage will find their house worth only $100,000. And this is exactly what is going on right now.
Well, you also mentioned there were some plans for the breakup of Canada. Now, I think people would find that quite fascinating. Can you tell us that story?
Well, that took place in 1996. The idea actually goes back to the early stages of the Reagan administration. When Reagan got into power, the big, the banking community got together and they basically told them, had the United States been a corporation, it would have been bankrupt. We have absolutely no money. But what we can do is we can merge Canada and the United States together into one. Canada is virgin territory, only 30 million people, lots of natural resources. There's a problem because Quebec is a nation that speaks another language. So what we do is we separate Quebec from the rest of Canada, and by merging the two, we can take control of Canadian natural resources. This is exactly what they have been doing since that time. And it took us a long time. Actually, it took me about 10 years to find out. But all these hostilities between the left and the right, the nationalists in Quebec, led by this Parti Québécois, the extremists. When we actually got really into it, we realized that the liberals, the conservatives, the nationalists, the extremists, the anarchists, all top people in each one of these organizations in Quebec province, they were all financed through the Rockefeller Corporation. When you see that, you say, I've seen it all. And what they're doing right now in Spain, in Catalonia, which also wants to secede from the rest of the country, I said, it's like, I've seen it all. It's like copy and paste. They're just plagiarizing what has been done in Canada 11 years ago. And I'm sure if I just scratch the surface, I'll find the same man behind the curtain doing the bidding on behalf of the power elite.
The true story of the Bilderberg Group. Daniel Estulin, thank you for joining us in the Iron and War.
Thanks so much for having me.